Chapter 16, Winn-Dixie, Grassley, Louisiana, Saturday, March 25th, 1967. 10 days after being shot, Patch watched the station wagon as the transiting weekend shoppers pulled into the little plaza. Jerry Samara, a husky man with wavy hair, sat in a light-colored Ford Fairlane 3 rows away from Patch. Charlie was back at Mulberry. Both were personable men and would talk about everything except security. They had transceivers and both possessed bulky mobile phones. Despite being with his 1967 colleagues, there were empty moments without Shari and the boys. Usually Patch would fall asleep imagining Shari on Galveston Beach or 100 other places, or the boys running around the schoolyard. How would he ever be able to return to Apex Junction? He twisted the AM radio and fiddled with the channels. He flipped through songs as if he were fanning a deck of cards. Then he stopped, with Jim Morrison of the Doors singing Break On Through. Patch began belting out the words, with Morrison, of course, carrying the song. Patch turned to the open window as the song shook the car. Natalie stood, smiling, with 2 ice cream sandwiches. Embarrassed, Patch, with his shoulder aching, stepped into the parking lot. "Hey, how come you stopped the concert, Patch?" "Natalie, I didn't know you were there." Still smiling, she held out the ice cream sandwiches. "It's okay, Patch. I enjoyed the concert. You must be feeling better." When the song ended, the news announcer came on the air.
The U.S. Department of Defense released its weekly list of American casualties in the Vietnam War, showing 211 servicemen killed in action during the week of March 12th to March 18th.
Patch reached inside and twisted the volume off. He guided her to the front seat and sat next to her behind the wheel. "So, I first heard the Doors on the radio in San Francisco, crossing the bridge last fall," she said, diverting the news report. "I wasn't a big Doors fan until Andy wrote me, said that Eddie used to listen to the Doors tapes with his buddies." She handed Patch a soggy ice cream sandwich. "Well, this is a mess." "Everything is a mess," he said, opening the soft sandwich with his teeth. "It's all over your mouth, Patch." She swabbed Patch's mouth and chin with her napkin. He looked past the thin frame glasses and focused on her reflective blue eyes. "Danke." She nodded. "You can put the radio back on." Patch slowly turned the knob, but quickly landed on a news report.
NASA halted further training for the 3 scheduled U.S. manned space missions and disbanded their 3-member crews, pending an overhaul of the entire Apollo program in light of the January 27th fire that killed the astronauts of Apollo 1.
"Oh, more good news," he said sarcastically.
This afternoon in Chicago, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King declared that we must combine the civil rights movement with the peace movement.
"King is pushing his luck with them," said Patch. "Them?" she asked, thinking for a moment. "Oh, them." Natalie raised her finger as she attempted to eat the ice cream. Patch wiped the dab off her nose. "Danke to you," she said, continuing. "King gets death threats, yet he persists."
Leading a parade against the Vietnam conflict were Dr. Benjamin Spock, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in a parade on State Street in Chicago. Here's a portion of Dr. King's similar speech in New York, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, in front of 3,000 people at the Riverside Church in New York City.
Instinct. The Americans are forcing even their friends into becoming their enemies. It is curious that the Americans, who calculate so carefully on the possibilities of military victory, do not realize that in the process they are incurring deep psychological and political defeat. The image of America will never again be the image of revolution, freedom, and democracy, but the image of violence and militarism, unquote. We continue, there would be no doubt in my mind, and in the mind of the world, that we have no honorable intentions in Vietnam. We do not stop our war against the people of Vietnam immediately. The world would be left with no other alternative than to see this as some horrible, clumsy, and deadly game we have decided to play. The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve. It demands that we admit that we have been wrong from the beginning of our adventure in Vietnam, that we have been detrimental to the life of the Vietnamese people. The situation is one in which we must be ready to turn sharply from our present ways.
During his speech, King proposed 5 solutions for the government to do: stop all bombings in North and South Vietnam, declare a unilateral ceasefire to create an atmosphere for negotiation, take steps to prevent other battlefields in Southeast Asia, except the National Liberation Front, which has substantial support in South Vietnam, and set a date to remove all foreign troops from Vietnam.
There comes a time when events reach a breaking point. She stopped eating the ice cream sandwich, when the power makers sense a disruption to the existing order. Exactly. Are you talking about Martin Luther King, Patch? King has a conscience and is doing the right thing. These people, the people who really run things, them, there is no morality, no code to live by. They're like wild animals. When threatened, they strike. All things resume the course they have set. Patch leaned forward toward the portable TV across the office downstairs. To the left, Meinkewitz had been in the centipede room all morning, fiddling with the computer. Devereaux and Samara were stationed upstairs, which gave him a sense of security. Patch slowly rotated his shoulder. Although stiff, the shoulder still had a full range and dull ache when he moved it. Natalie pulled up a chair next to him. She looked down the newspaper listings. Who's this on TV now? They're playing back an interview with Gordon Novell, said Patch. He claimed to know Lee Oswald. Did he? Probably. Meinkewitz emerged from the room. Novell is linked to the CIA. He's a Class 1 liar. Thought you were going to say something else, Ray, said Patch. Natalie grinned. I was. Meinkewitz held his pen to his notebook as a little weasel of a guy began trolling the reporters.
He's perpetrating one of the most enormous frauds on the world and on the United States in particular, and on my home state and on New Orleans. And if it goes much further, there's just no telling where Mr. Garrison will go.
What is his motive? Why is he doing this here?
He reminds me of Huey Long. And he reminds me of a combination of Huey Long and some things that I've read about Dr. Goldman. He's a little bit of both.
Denali's voice came over the blue box.
Patch there.
I'm right here, sir.
How are you feeling?
A lot better.
Glad to hear that. But I also want to make it clear that it's your choice whether you want to get back into action.
I'll go back. Natalie gave him the thumbs-up sign. Patch reflectively winked.
Good. Garrison, as you heard, ordered the arrest of Gordon Novell as a material witness in the conspiracy to assassinate the president. Novell may leave for Ohio. Members of my staff still believe the CIA will thwart any attempt to bring Novell back to New Orleans.
What role do you think Novell played in the conspiracy, Denali? Asked Meinkewitz.
He worked closely with Berry and the anti-Castro Cuban boys. Novell in 1961, he raided a munitions bunker in Huma with Berry and the others.
Answered Denali. People are coming out of the woodwork, said Patch.
Those weapons went to counter Castro groups in Cuba. Novell and CIA all the way. He worked with the Evergreen Advertising Agency in New Orleans, CIA front, that alerted anti-Castro agents to the date of the Bay of Pigs invasion by placing coded messages in radio commercials for Christmas trees. Novell himself is a paid employee of the CIA.
I knew it, said Meinkewitz.
And he has a lawyer, like Stephen Plotkin. Plotkin said openly that Novell is a CIA agent. Novell is taking a little vacation to the CIA in McLean.
Ah, what a surprise. Dr. Mike Cameron here. If the CIA obstructs Garrison's investigation, what can Garrison do about it?
Well, Mike, good job at taking care of Patch.
Thank you.
Let me say this. Novellis made one significant mistake. The two girls who moved into his apartment found a penciled rough draft of a letter under a strip of linoleum in the kitchen's sink drain board. Confirmed by experts that he wrote the letter. Plotkin says that everything in the letter, as far as Novellis is concerned, is actually the truth.
So he's writing pen pal letters to the CIA.
Mr. Weiss is Novellis' handler in the CIA. He said Garrison was going to expose Novellis' links to the Double Check Corporation in Miami, which the CIA recruits pilots and saboteurs. Mr. Novell is a bloodsucker. He's one of those recruited to suck the blood out of the Garrison case. And Judge Haggerty has ruled that the Warren report may not be admitted as evidence.
Well, there's reams of information in those volumes, shouted Patch. Now what can we do?
Await any further orders. Right now, you're staying put. We have operatives on the ground looking for Sutcliffe to break down the security that brought the muscle against you people,
said Denali.
They're going to limit the information Garrison can use.
Not only that, they're going to tamper with witnesses and loyalists like Hugh Ainsworth. They're writing lies. Garrison can't overcome that.
And NBC is thinking of a way to destroy Garrison,
said Denali. What, for finding the truth? Asked Mike.
I have people working with the FCC.
The public will be subjected to propaganda, said Patch.
That is exactly right.
Under the watchful eyes of the pudgy Jerry Samara, along the side of the house, Patch joined Natalie on the side trail. The sun was low between the trees as Patch and Natalie walked the rutted grassy road bordering the field. Spring had warmed up the air and sweet-scented flowers were blooming. Meinkewitz always liked the Dodgers before and after they were in Brooklyn, and when I told him what the new Red Sox manager said, Ray started his Dodgers rant. What did the Red Sox manager say? She asked. Let me quote, because the Boston Red Sox haven't had a good team since the 40s. I mean, a really good team. He said, honestly, I believe we'll win more games than we lose. I read it in the sports section. Well, what's so bad about that? Oh, it gets better. Ray bets me $100 they'll finish last. So I say they finish first and win the American League pennant. Her smooth hand brushed against his hand, but he moved away slightly. So you're saying that you have a $100 bet with Meinkewitz on the Red Sox winning the pennant? No, $200. I never understood betting. That's good, because I never understood women. That I believe. Hey, watch it. Sunlight covered Patch and Natalie as they sat on a log at the far end of the field, some distance from the Mulberry house. Jerry was less than 100 yards away, smoking a cigarette at the bend in the trail. Natalie, tell me about your brother. A smile descended over her as if talking about Eddie brought a restful peace. How he used to ride me on the handlebars of his Schwinn bike down Reynolds Hill. I was scared, and he told me not to worry because he was in charge. It was just you and Eddie? She nodded. He was one hell of a football player, Patch. What do they call it? Reckless abandonment? He was never scared. If you were an opposing player and you were hit by Eddie, you went down. Patch smiled. Your parents must have been proud. Everyone was. Eddie was a no-nonsense guy. He'd cut down a 230-pound fullback at full speed, then get up while they were helping the fullback to his feet. Eddie was just 190. And then he was drafted. No. Edward F. Tompkins enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He used to say the F was for ferocious. Then he knew he was going to Vietnam. Natalie nodded. You're damn right he did. He said there were countries that threatened our way of life. It's not just countries, said Patch. What about your parents? They knew Vietnam wasn't a walk in the park. I was scared and he knew it. He told me not to worry. He's in charge. Yep, that's what he said. He made it through 65, she said, her voice lower. Then he requested another tour. He's buried in Arlington, not too far from President Kennedy. They just moved the president to a more permanent memorial in March. The ceremony for Eddie was magnificent. Eddie would have approved. The Marines, each step executed properly. The rifle bearers, the pallbearers, withdrawing the casket from the hearse and carrying it to the grave. Attention! Present arms! As the casket is carried to the grave, all detailed participants will order arms. Extraordinary. I was strong because I kept hearing Eddie tell me I'm in charge. Taps sounded with the broken note. The flag was folded and presented to my parents. Do they think you're dead? No. She exhaled. Denali had our congressional representative meet privately. Told him I was on an intelligence mission. Thanks for giving me the background on Eddie. She nodded. If we get out of this, and that's a big if, I want to go to work for Bobby Kennedy if he runs. I watched a report on Bobby last night. Is he thinking of getting in? Asked Patch. No, that wasn't it. He and another Senator, Clark, I think, were in Mississippi, the Delta. I missed it because I just started Lane's book, said Patch. I should have called you downstairs. Well, what was happening? They came up to a shack in Cleveland, Mississippi. 15 people living in one little shack. Holes in the floor and the roof. Only food was a jar of peanut butter. One little child, her voice cracking. All he had for breakfast and dinner was molasses. No lunch. Bobby was walking to the next house and said, I've been to third world countries. I've never seen anything like this. You have to remember that Bobby was so hurt by his brother's death that he triggered a deep compassion, said Patch. Yeah, he started reading Aeschylus after Jack's death, she said. Who except the gods can live time through forever without any pain? Patch almost put his hand on her wrist. I understand. Bobby walked through to a house with no tables. The woman had 7 kids, no food utensils, a toilet with no plumbing working, a baby covered with sores, stomach extended because he hadn't eaten. Bobby knelt down and ran his hand along the child's cheek. He caressed the child and talked to him, but the child was numb. The senator began to cry. Kennedy stepped outside and quietly remarked, see if I can remember it, we spend $75 billion a year on armaments and $3 billion a year on dogs. We have to do more for these children, but didn't ask to be born into this. I wrote down what Bobby told his family when he arrived home during dinner. Apparently he was still shaken. Well, what did he say? She removed a folded piece of paper from her pocket. In Mississippi, a whole family lives in a shack about the size of this room. The children are covered with sores and their tummies stick out because they have no food. Do you know how lucky you are? Do something for your country. Thomas Merton, Raids on the Unspeakable, said Patch. The unspeakable? She asked. Satan and the world today. Merton, yes. The Abbey of Our Lady of Gethsemane in Kentucky. You Catholic, Patch? No. Merton stepped from the otherworldly devotion into a focused, critical view of humans in the world. Merton sees the dark shadows, but he offers Christian optimism. Merton corresponds with RFK's sister. Would that the real world could wake up to his words, said Natalie. Patch paused and leaned back. Look how they're all swarming over Garrison to take him down. In the yellow-orange sunlight, she kissed her finger and placed it on his forehead. I like you, Patch. I like you too, but then again, you saved my life. Hungry? She asked with the same snap in her step as she stepped onto the dirt road. Not as hungry as those kids in Mississippi. Amen. She nodded slowly and motioned him forward with her wiggly index finger. Let's go back. Chapter 17. 977 Mulberry Road, Grassley, Louisiana, April 20th, 1967. Denali's voice vibrated in Meynkewitz's blue box in the downstairs office.
On April 1st, CIA Director Richard Helms launched a classified global campaign entitled Countering the Warren Commission Critics. This is what we've been fearing.
They're really going to attempt to shut down the Garrison investigation. But Ray, They're going to do it with newspaper editors and reporters, said Patch, adjusting his position in the chair until the pain in his shoulder dissipated. Need some ice, Patch? Asked Natalie, leaning over. Patch subtly held up his thumb as if he were hitchhiking for a ride.
That's not the worst of it, Patch,
said Denali.
No one has ever heard of the Garrison group that Richard Helms is establishing.
Sure sounds like counterintelligence, said Natalie. She stood and crossed to the kitchen.
That is exactly what it is. What Helms is beginning to do is identify all possible CIA assets within Garrison's investigation.
I think they already did that with us at the zoo, said Patch. Any word on how security was broken?
I'll get you that information soon. To expand on the Garrison group, Garrison just doesn't get it about what the CIA can do, or if he does, he's not saying.
Natalie handed Patch a plastic bag filled with ice. Thanks, Natalie, he said with a quick smile as he pressed the ice against his shirt. How serious is the CIA in this? Asked Patch as he held the cold plastic bag to his shoulder.
Angleton is more than serious,
said Denali. No small potatoes, he, said Meinkewitz. CIA's been all over Oswald for years, said Patch. Angleton's staff surveilled Oswald for 4 years after his defection to the Soviet Union in November 1959. How do you know this? Asked Dr. Mike.
He's right. We have been given classified files,
said Denali.
As I've said before, certain CIA officials have had a keen interest in Oswald in late 1963. This is important. 6 senior CIA officials reporting to Helms and Angleton in the fall of '63 were informed about Oswald's travels, political activity, foreign contacts 6 weeks before JFK was killed. George Joannides, the chief of psychological warfare operations in Miami, maintained a residence in New Orleans in '63 and '64. He knew all about Oswald. All of this is high-level CIA following Oswald, the so-called loner loser.
Well, this is incredible, said Meinkewitz.
That's not the boiling point for the Milky Way Network,
said Denali. Well, what do you mean?
Lieutenant Tompkins' photos have been analyzed. The reason for the delay was a hazy figure in the background when Sutcliffe was apprehended.
Patch had an uneasy feeling in his stomach. CIA? Asked Patch.
Yes. In the background, behind the restaurant window, Baker Finch is watching his men abduct Sutcliffe. We'll get those photos to you in the tube this evening.
Do they know Patch and Natalie were involved in the operation? Asked Meinkewitz.
Possibly, but the consensus is they were executing their operation. Capture Sutcliffe, then bring in the team to take you two out. In any event, you two were headed to Grassley long before they understood you got away.
What the hell does this guy want? Asked Patch.
Prove the existence of Milky Way, which he may speculate he has done by possessing the tube with Mike's research.
Damn, said Mike.
Finch's overall job is to protect the plot.
Patch spoke in a serious voice. Do not ask for who the CIA bell tolls. It tolls for us. Meinkewitz pushed open the screen door and Patch looked up from Mark Lane's book, Rush to Judgment. On the FM radio, a local station was playing songs from The Doors' first album from January. Patch looked up. Run out of things for me to do, Ray? How can you read that book with all that noise? It almost sounds jazzy, but it's still that infernal rock and roll. Morrison likes Sinatra. I don't believe it. Morrison is indecent. Patch had an unabashed grin as Meinkewitz studied Patch's shoulder, but did not tell him to turn down the radio. How are you feeling? Good. When I exercise the shoulder, it gets tighter later on. I'll be all right. Meinkewitz dropped 4 black and white 8x10 photos in Patch's lap. Baker Finch peered out the restaurant window. Do you know how lucky you and Natalie were, Patch? Getting shot isn't lucky, Ray. Patch flipped through the secondary pictures. Finch is one of those arrogant Ivy Leaguers, a know-it-all. He's got to find us to get us, Ray. We need to get something to the investigation before the press and Finch and the government clog up everything. Funny you should say that, said Meinkewitz. That nosy skunk Jack Anderson has been in New Orleans. Anderson is a troublemaker, said Patch. He's a Class A clogger, and I do mean Class A. Just doing his job, said Patch, smiling. Meynkewitz's eyes popped open. The problem with Anderson, and he's just like his old boss, Drew Pearson, he runs with his own kind of facts. He's been advised by LBJ's press secretary to bring in what he learned to the FBI. Just what is he saying? That there was a conspiracy to kill the president. So Ray, what's wrong with that? The FBI? Are you kidding me? You know how they covered up and how they nailed Oswald. They'll put it in the circular file, said Patch. Anderson met MacArthur DeLoach. DeLoach is taking that information into a memo for Hoover's buddy, Clyde Tolson. Like handing over evidence Garrison should keep close to his chest. Exactly. This is what I'm saying about Anderson, said Meinkewitz, raising his index finger. Now Johnson is saying he is now convinced there was a plot in connection with the assassination, and the CIA had something to do with the plot. And I hear that several members of the Warren Commission feel the same way, Patch. Then we'd best get our butts in gear. Is there any way to track Finch? I asked that question to Denali. He does have contacts in the CIA, but trying to track an agent like Finch isn't the most easy thing in the world to do. Forewarned is forearmed. Nice book. Outside the centipede room, Patch fiddled with the 7.5-inch tape they had received and threaded over the machine's recording head. He glanced at Meynkewitz's computations in black ink on the white-lined clipboard pad. Guess we have to go through everything, said Natalie. She looked at Meynkewitz's 360 computer with the flat screen and printer. Keep forgetting you're a top-level physicist, Ray. That and 10 cents will get you a trolley trip to Ebbets Field, Natalie, and a hot dog at the concession. Maybe. Ray is self-effacing, said Patch. Like you, Patch, she said, grinning. That brought a hearty laugh from Meinkewitz. I don't think so. Look, even after we go through everything, Natalie, said Meinkewitz, there may be an interpretation. We can pass that on to the investigation. Keep doing those shoulder exercises, said Dr. Mike. Natalie raised her brows with a prissy lip smile. It's been over a month since our Battle of New Orleans. Well, we have security now, said Patch. Army intel combined with Finch and his men were prepared to kill us, she said. They don't even know who we are, said Patch. Well, they'd better not. They knew enough to try and kill you. Now they're sniffing like starving hound dogs. Patch turned around toward Meinkewitz and grinned. Always with the metaphorical scenarios. Well, somebody's got to do it. And you, Patch, you should have been dead 100 times. I'll second that assessment. Meinkewitz flipped the switch on his blue box. Denali.
Is everyone there?
We're all present and accounted for, said Patch.
I've been told how and why Baker Finch ended up at the zoo. Sutcliffe told his partner, who happens to be his brother lawyer at his firm in Baton Rouge, that he was going to the Audubon Zoo date and time. That itself wasn't a problem, but he mentioned the Garrison investigation in passing.
Loose lips. Sink ships, said Meinkewitz.
We figure his brother must have dropped the information inadvertently to someone else. Whatever happened, it trickled up to some intelligence operatives, finally to Finch. They began following Sutcliffe. Finch requested backup, and I'm sure that was meant to intimidate Sutcliffe, never thinking he would face Patch and Natalie. We sent Natalie when Sutcliffe's name reverberated around our channel. Our contacts picked it up, and we knew there might possibly be a problem.
But did they know our identities? Patch asked, looking at Natalie. I don't see how they could. They weren't following either of you, said Meinkewitz.
And get this, watch the news, no mention of the firefight at the zoo. The mess was cleaned up like it never even happened. I can assure you at 6 Dead they'll be looking for you two. We think all they have are descriptions from witnesses, but that was in the middle of a firefight. Our next drop-off will be quick and precise. Finally, as a matter of note, no one inside the investigation has been compromised. End transmission.
Okay, let's play the tape. Here's Mark Lane on the Joe Dolan Show last Tuesday, said Patch as he turned the chrome-activated lever. Lane began saying that he'd seen the evidence. He was very impressed with Garrison's grasp of the case and his staff overwhelmed by what they have discovered. Lane said, "Nothing, I think, can stop him from walking into that courtroom in New Orleans, presenting the evidence. And when he does, there's going to be a sense of shock. I think that's probably never been equaled in our country's history. That Garrison now has half his staff working full-time and he's recovered remarkable information." He called Jim Garrison an intellectual as district attorney, and how Garrison said that he supports freedom, which is individual liberty, which is what this country is all about. Not catching the crooks, but the rights of the individual. "Well, there it is," said Meinkewitz, looking at his notes. "A very powerful domestic force, which remains part of the American structure now, planned events which culminated in the assassination of President Kennedy, and the anti-Castro Cubans executed the program. Put that in perspective with what Renault told us at the fight in Houston. It's right in front of us, 75 years before they released certain files." "We need names," said Natalie. Patch kept running through the usual suspects in his thoughts. "No opinion, Patch? These people were very clever." "They still are," said Natalie. "Hence Finch, the next generation, tried to ruin Lane," added Patch. "Lane is right," said Natalie. "Garrison is a smart guy and he speaks in intellectual terms, like Lane said. The press is still at the howdy-doody level." Patch laughed so hard he raised his hand to his aching shoulder. "Well put, Miss Natalie, well put." Chapter 19. Pontchartrain Charter Boats, Lake Pontchartrain, outside New Orleans, Louisiana, May 14, 1967. Vietnam, combat deaths, May 1967, 443. Patch, sunglasses flipped over his eyes, was positioned on an upper deck chair as the boat Cajun Queen chugged slowly several miles from shore. On this bright day, he had placed an envelope under his green Tulane windbreaker. Jerry Samara sat center vessel in the open seats like a tourist with a dumb-looking reverse baseball cap. Patch's shoulder muscle was tight, but he was out of pain. Denali informed Meinkewitz that a man named Will Johnson from Texas would meet Patch once the boat was far away from shore. He grinded his teeth after reading an advance copy of Rush to Judgment in New Orleans by James Phelan, just out in the Saturday Evening Post. The Post stamped a doctored photo of Oswald's face on the body of their magazine cover. A forged photo of Oswald in militia black, holding a Mannlicher Carcano rifle with Marxist newspapers in his other hand. It was a shadowy cover with shadowy people, all under the guise of an artist's rendition of President Kennedy. Patch looked up as Johnson had not yet arrived, as if the cover was not devastating enough, and the timing perfect. Phelan rolled out a treasure chest of propaganda. He began creating a cardboard cutout of an egocentric, out-of-control jackass, Garrison, who craved media attention from around the world. Once he had constructed that template, Phelan brought Ayn Rand into Garrison's arsenal. He made Garrison into a bumbling fool, and Garrison said he and his staff had solved the Kennedy assassination weeks ago. Funny how the intelligence agencies can contextualize a target and attack that target, thought Patch. Meinkewitz told him that is what they did to Garrison. They did the same thing to David Ferry, no angel he, in order to discredit witnesses brought forth by Garrison and his staff. Phelan invoked sympathy for Clay Shaw and stayed away from the pertinent facts about the assassination. The writer twisted and distorted the vetting of Perry Russo, with Garrison using truth serum and hypnosis. It was a clear attempt to make it appear that Russo was programmed with what Garrison wanted for testimony. There was more journalism in this onslaught. Newsweek magazine and Hugh Ainsworth were now on board with a concerted attack. Patch was ready to read that twisted reality that created a cardboard cutout called Crazy Jim Garrison. Patch looked up at the Newsweek article and his body tightened when he saw Commander Phineas Beauregard gazing through field glasses across Lake Pontchartrain. Banquo's ghost. He wore dark, baggy dungarees, an Eisenhower light-colored jacket, and an old grungy fishing cap of Lore's. Patch waited as Finney sidestepped along the rail. He grabbed his coffee and opened a metal fishing box. Patch left the magazines on the chair and stared at the lake as he approached Finney. "How the hell are you alive, Finney?" he asked out of the corner of his mouth. "How's your shoulder?" "How do you know?" asked Patch. "That's not important right now," said Finney, lighting a cigarette. "Place the envelope in the box." "My shoulder's just about healed," said Patch, dropping the envelope inside. "Good man. Nice to see you looking fit as a fiddle, Commander." Finney raised the binoculars toward the lake. "When you fake dying in a massive explosion, it does wonders for your appearance. I went out on foot from the Powell building 7 minutes after the explosion. Lucky as hell. I was in the mountains for 4 days. Then I contacted Mendacia. I was flown on a Navy jet up to Denali." "Who is he?" asked Patch, squinting. He let the binoculars dangle and sipped his coffee. "A man who wants to get this country back on track." Finney glanced at the envelope out of the corner of his eye. "Garrison is sinking and he doesn't even know it. Well, those bastards are attacking him in the magazines. They're as clever as Phillips and Hunt," said Patch. "What makes you think those reporters even wrote the articles? They make Garrison look like he's creating a Manchurian candidate, injecting people with true serum to program them. It's brutal, Patch. It's going to get worse. NBC is about to broadcast a nationwide expose to take down Garrison. About a month from now. They brought in Walter Sheridan as a reporter. Well, he works for the intelligence services. And he worked for Bobby Kennedy against Hoffa. Didn't he bribe witnesses?" "Yeah, he did." "Why is Bobby going after Garrison?" asked Patch. Finney shook his head. "Bobby has to be careful. Look at it this way. They just murdered your brother and got away with it. I suppose that's true. Is there any way to stop that NBC piece?" asked Patch. "Bobby knew of Oswald's activities in New Orleans and the anti-Castro people. They sent this man Sheridan down there, and you got Bobby boxed in. They'll pump up Johnson within the primaries next year, so Bobby can't be nominated. Not a good position to be in." Patch looked across the bright water. "What about you? Do you need anything?" Finney kept his eyes forward. "Prayer. They believe I'm dead, but with the CIA, that means jack shit. I gotta go. Well, I have one more thing. Paper I just dropped on the ground is a photo from Dealey Plaza, November 22nd, 1963, just 30 seconds after JFK had been killed. The limo's on the way to Parkland. Goddamn Baker Finch is standing right in the back of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. We think he was helping somebody out of the building, and it wasn't Lee Oswald. Do your job, Patch." "Good luck, sir," said Patch, looking ahead. "Don't worry about me, Patch. I'm expendable. If they thwart Garrison, the cover-up and future wars will continue forever." Finney remained at the rail as Patch shuffled to the aft end. He spoke with a couple from Texas for a few minutes, but Finney was gone. Jerry Samara remained stationed in the center seat. Patch turned and focused on the monstrous wave stretched out behind the vessel. He couldn't help but think that those churning waters were like the deluge remaining after President Kennedy's murder. Patch slipped back to the seat on the starboard side and nonchalantly picked up his Newsweek magazine with the yellow cover. His racing heart had not yet settled down. He opened Newsweek, aware of Hugh Ainsworth's destructive, venomous, and quite deceitful article. Ainsworth, once a Dallas Morning News reporter, was now doing the bidding of the CIA as a correspondent for Newsweek. Patch read the article anyway, all the while aware there were forces all around who wanted Garrison shut down. Patch crunched Ainsworth's Newsweek article containing the folded Finch Dealey Plaza photo under his windbreaker when he saw Jerry Samara, his hand on his gun under his jacket, along the rail as he peered across the lake. Patch scampered diagonally and then grabbed the rail. Finney, alone, was in a yellow inflatable raft powered by an outboard motor. Patch knew Finney would somehow connect with the man inside the investigation. A slow smile came to Patch's face when he realized that both Finney and Natalie had survived and had evaded Finch and his cronies. Chapter 18, 977 Mulberry Road, Grassley, Louisiana, April 21st, 1967. Natalie's room was on the second floor on the right. The light-painted room had shadowy lace curtains. With the morning sunlight, the shades were pulled. Natalie, her hair pinned up, wore beige shorts with the warmer weather. Patch sat next to her on the comforter. "I think I nearly have full range," said Patch as she guided his arm around in a huge circle. "Just don't make any sudden moves," she said. "I wouldn't dare." She moved in front of him and opened her blue eyes as she studied the healing wound and stitches. "Are you going to stare away my infirmities, Natalie?" She raised her brow and produced her coy smile. "I thought I was." Meinkewitz yelled from below. "Come on, we've got work to do, you slackers. I'll be at the conference table." "I think we're being paged," said Patch as he stood. "Thanks." "My pleasure," she said, leading him forward. Meinkewitz handed Patch last night's teletype memo from Denali as Patch reached the wide wood table. "Who wrote this?" asked Patch. "Garrison sent Assistant District Attorney William R. Martin to Springfield, Missouri to speak with Nagel. The memo he wrote is on this teletype." "Well, I'd like to read this since Sherry and I saw this bizarre holdup in El Paso and Pilatus, Nagel. I spoke with him in depth. Nagel is the one who sent me to Mexico City. He discharged a firearm in that bank." "He did. Thanks, Natalie. I will have a cup." "Make that two," said Patch, holding up 2 fingers. She smiled. He returned the smile and spread the memo over the table. Memorandum, April 18, 1967. To Jim Garrison, District Attorney. From William R. Martin, Assistant District Attorney. Subject, Richard Case Nagel. When he was allowed to go in to visit Nagel. Nagel immediately opened up the conversation by saying he was sorry he had caused Martin to make the long trip from New Orleans for no purpose at all. He stated the matter much thought and had decided it was useless in his own best interest to turn over any material to the investigation. He said he admired Garrison for his willingness to undertake the investigation and expose the truth no matter where it led. He also said there were 3 separate plots to assassinate President Kennedy. The first plan was to kill President Kennedy by bombing a concealed bomb in the speaker's platform or the speaker's podium December or January of 1962 when the president traveled to Miami, Florida to address a group of Cuban prisoners who had taken part in the Bay of Pigs invasion and who had just been released to return to the States. The second and similar plan was to kill the president on June of '63 when the president traveled to Los Angeles for an important speaking engagement. Nagel said that the first and second plots never really became serious and that the plans never did reach more than the talking stage. The third and final plot, which indeed did end with the assassination of President Kennedy, was an offshoot of the other 2 plans and was planned and put into effect by the same group of people. The subject stated that these plots to kill Kennedy had involved several men, some of them Cubans, that all 3 plots have been based along the same thinking and logic. He also said the Cubans who took part in the assassination acted as individuals and did not belong in one organization or even 2 organizations. They'd all come together and been known to each other because of these organizations. Nagel apologized to Martin for having to explain himself by saying he was very much concerned, at least that he gets involved with more trouble with the FBI or the CIA. He also stated he'd done a variety of work assigned to him out of the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, that he had been briefed by a member of that embassy to the Miami and Los Angeles plots to assassinate President Kennedy. He was able to make a tape recording, 4 voices in conversation concerning the plot which ended in the assassination of President Kennedy. Martin found him extremely articulate and well-spoken. He said it was his opinion that everything will depend on the aforementioned box or trunk containing his possessions and how it's handled. He also stated to Martin that the release of his tape recording to Garrison was the first step in seeing what he could do to square himself with his country. Patch took a gulp of coffee before he spoke again. Q has to be Chichi Quintero, protege of Carl Jenkins. It fits into what Nagel told Martin. Patch's memory of Chichi Quintero knocking on Oswald's apartment door in the late summer of 1963 was confirmed by a previous Denali teletype with information from Garrison's office. On April 15th, Quintero was asked whether he had seen Oswald only once on the day he visited him on Magazine Street. Quintero failed the polygraph for that trip, as well as knowing about the Fair Play for Cuba Oswald cover. He lied about Acacia Smith and Bannister knowing Oswald. Acacia had visited New Orleans in 1963, and because Chichi Quintero had answered no, it showed up on the machine. Patch remembered that Carl Jenkins considered Chichi like a son, and that Jenkins trained assassins in Texas and Mexico. Coincidentally, the polygraph lit up when Quintero lied about not having seen any guns used in the assassination. And Acacia Smith, damn, these people are still alive. Well, proving it, Patch, is another matter. Now listen up. You're going to do another drop-off in a couple of weeks. Oh, great, said Patch. I prefer to do the drop with the New Orleans police force. Is it safe? Asked Natalie, smiling. We'll make it safe. This time you'll have backup with either Jerry or Charlie. I would like to volunteer for that detail, Ray, said Natalie. Everything will have to be cleared with Denali. What about Sutcliffe? Asked Patch. Is he still alive? Meinkewitz stared at Patch as if he were going to give him more information. Missing. Oh, damn, said Patch. How do we get these things to Garrison? In case you haven't noticed, Denali is an extremely powerful and well-connected man. If we get clearance, you'll be on a charter boat away from land, where you'll meet the courier. Hopefully the courier will do his job and keep his mouth shut. But time goes on. Natalie stood solid. And as the years pass, what will happen to the legacy of President Kennedy? Patch spoke from across the table. For children preserve the fame of a man after his death. Who said that, Patch? Well, asked Meinkewitz. Those not yet born. I read the quote going through the encyclopedia upstairs. Then he smiled at Natalie. It was Aeschylus. She returned the smile and slowly nodded. Chapter 20, 977 Mulberry Road, Grassley, Louisiana, May 14, 1967. Meinkewitz slid the bright desk lamp and the magnifier over the black and white photograph depicting the road to the east of the depository. Behind the police car, a gathering crowd stood in the shadow of the building on November 22, 1963. A young man raced back toward Houston Street. Patch leaned toward the magnifier. Could that be Finch? Could be him, said Natalie. They've done forensic work on this photograph, said Meinkewitz. It's gone via Denali up to IMINT where they do the imagery intelligence. Why is this guy in the middle of the assassination? He was simply stationed there if somebody reached ground level. Maybe he coordinated a ride for someone or checked the logistical element in the plaza. Well, this is unbelievable, Patch ranted. The sad part is that it's true, said Meinkewitz. How in a million years did you find this, Ray? Asked Patch. Not us. Denali wanted every available photo checked and then verified from Dealey Plaza. Months of sorting through people and photos. Finch was a byproduct. There are others who are in photos in the plaza. Who? Asked Patch, pointing toward Meinkewitz. Not known because it could lead back to Milky Way. Does Finch know that photo exists? Asked Natalie. I don't think so, said Meinkewitz. I think they have this cover-up in the bag, said Patch. Another reason to go after this guy, added Natalie. Patch clenched his fist. You all right, Patch? Asked Meinkewitz. Patch slowly turned. Baker Finch must be taken down. Memo from Denali to Polaris, May 10, 1967. This is the nonsense the FBI is peddling. Russo, Perry Raymond. Russo is an insurance company employee. Russo is the main witness against Clay Shaw, who testified that he and Russo were present at a meeting when Shaw, Lee Harvey Oswald, introduced to Russo as Leon Oswald, and David Ferry, homosexual who died, plotted the assassination. Russo appears to be lying. Garrison's staff used hypnosis and drugs to get him to tell his story. We've received information indicating that his mind by Garrison's men, the story that he tells, was placed in while hypnotized and drugged. This very morning, Meinkewitz had flown to an unknown location to meet with Denali. Patch was optimistic that that meeting might yield more information. They held a meeting downstairs in his absence because of the new witness testimony memos. "I think Russo's telling the truth," said Mike. Phelan, for one, finagled the sequence, making his readers think that Garrison was programming Russo. Patch sat next to Natalie across the table. He hadn't said much during the meeting. "Rumors are true that Sheridan's going to get Russo a primo insurance job in L.A. Patch held another memo and studied the paragraph. Another FBI doodah. Vernon Bundy is the narcotics addict that testified at Clay Shaw's hearing in New Orleans that he had observed Shaw meet with Lee Harvey Oswald on the New Orleans lakefront in 1963. We had previously received an allegation that Bundy's testimony was false and that he had received a deal from New Orleans District Attorney Garrison wherein his prison sentence would be shortened provided he testify as he did at Shaw's hearing. He says he saw Shaw and Oswald together. Why did Garrison bring this guy to the witness list?" asked Patch. "There's dozens of witnesses in Clinton and Jackson. This guy's a heroin addict and in jail. I wish Ferry and Denali were alive." "That doesn't mean that Bundy didn't see Shaw and Oswald together," said Mike. "I know that. Garrison's putting out an immediate objection when he doesn't have to, just like when he starts pontificating. Meinkewitz told me on the phone that the government has people all over Clinton and Jackson, threatening, paying off, you name it. Here's another lie." Memo, Denali, Milky Way Network, May 17, 1967. Question: Do you recall what time of day this was when you saw these two men out on the lakefront meeting each other? Like I say, it was around 9:30, quarter to 10. I can't be too exact about the time. I know about the time I left home and about the time it took me to get to Pontchartrain Beach. Were you able to see their faces clearly? Yeah, pretty clearly. Do you know whether or not either of these two men is in the courtroom today? Answer: one of them. Where is he? There. Which one are you pointing to? The gray-haired fellow. Which one of these two men have you described as the one that you are pointing to? The older fellow. All right, Vernon, you can get up from the witness stand. I want you to walk down and stand behind the man you saw down at the lakefront who gave money to the younger man, or whatever it appeared to be, and put your hand over his head. You can go back to the stand. Your witness. He identified Shaw, said Natalie. Patch nodded. I think Bundy's telling the truth. I'll go back to what I said. Bundy could be 100% credible. It doesn't matter with his background, if it will fly. These people will lie about witness testimony, said Patch. Once you start getting the perception in people's heads, then it's all over. The meeting moved to the outside porch. Meinkewitz had left them copies of the grand jury testimony from last month. Patch held the bound white pages. The cover ink had a freshly printed smell. Ray lands at 1? asked Patch. Correct, at the Purveyor landing strip in Dalton. I'm going to talk to him about Washington and Denali. We can all read the grand jury testimony and then meet. Agreed. About that and all your concerns, Patch. Hopefully Ray will be able to bring some credibility to the network and operations. Our work with this investigation isn't about dying, laughed Patch. It's about dying for stupid mistakes. Patch crunched up the wooden porch swing and began sifting through the pages of the investigator Harold Weisberg's testimony. An entire group of investigators and private citizens had begun questioning the Warren report as well as the TV conjecture after the assassination. It was also simply understood when Patch had witnessed the horror in Dealey Plaza, but now he was helpless to prove the facts he had seen with his own eyes. "How can you be comfortable in that hard swing?" asked Natalie as the screen door slammed behind her. "Your having gotten involved with this operation, it must be evident that I'm a glutton for punishment," said Patch. Then he finally looked up. She wore a lightweight sundress and white sandals. Her auburn hair touched her shoulders. "Snazzy." "Snazzy? How about cute?" she asked, wedging herself between Patch's toes and the other swing arm. Her leg rested on Patch's toes. "Cute. Thank you. What do you think of Weisberg's testimony?" "He was an analyst in World War II. He's very good at details, Natalie. But here's the problem with all this. You can find out details from now until the year 2000. It's like being on a roller coaster in an underground tunnel. Maybe that's what the CIA wanted, for everybody to chase their tails." "Are you chasing your tail, Patch?" she asked, snickering. Patch laughed and set down the pages. He pointed at her. "Sometimes you can be funny." "I'd like to finish my statement, mademoiselle." "The Oracle speaks." "Thank you." She turned and balanced her knuckles on her chin. "The people that planned the assassination know that all they have to do is keep the narrative about Kennedy's death at a certain level with the public. That's why they had the patsy. Oswald, being the lone assassin, squelches any public clamor. Oh, sure, there are many people that doubt that myth. It doesn't matter as long as the truth doesn't reach a critical mass." She sat up straight. "That's pretty good. Thank you. If Ferry and DeValley had lived and testified in a court of law, that narrative would have reached a critical mass. That's what the plotters fear the most, the people. And you sway the people with under oath testimony." "Anybody ever tell you you're brilliant?" she asked. "I'm not brilliant. I'm upset." She lifted the testimony pages off of Patch's chest. Houch's shoulder. "I was lucky. It's in good shape," he said as he sat up. She undid his shirt button and wrapped her fingers around the fabric. She slowly pulled it back, exposing Patch's shoulder and part of the hair on his chest. Just below the clavicle he was healing, a deeper, pink-toned, circular skin clump. "You're fortunate that bullet missed the other side of your shoulder blade and that it never exited out the other side." Patch was becoming increasingly aware how much he liked her, but that was unacceptable. He repeatedly kept thinking about Shari and returning home. She left the shirt open. "Ever been shot before?" "No, I was a pilot working in classified projects." She put her hand on Patch's shoulder. "That hurt?" "Hurt? It does not," said Patch. "When this is over, Patch, I'd like you to..." At that moment, Mike pushed open the screen door. "How's the wound look?" Natalie produced a blank expression, probably at Dr. Mike's intrusion. "What do you think, Mike?" "I think he's made great progress." "I'm glad." She removed her hand from Patch's shoulder. "I just wanted to tell you that Charlie is driving us up to Dalton to pick up Ray. Jerry will remain in the house. We'll be leaving in 15 minutes. "Thanks for the update, Mike," said Patch. Mike seemed to understand he may have arrived on the porch at an inopportune time. He regurgitated a grunting laugh. You'll know when it's time to go when the station wagon starts." Dr. Mike went back in the house and Natalie buttoned Patch's shirt. "Just for the record, Natalie," she could not stop her ascending smile. "Yes?" Patch wanted to tell her that he liked her, but he couldn't cross the line. "Thanks for all that you've done." She was waiting for him to express his affection, and her sunken face displayed her feelings as she turned back toward the trail. Now he was even more confused about his own feelings. Patch convinced Charlie to let him drive the station wagon. Dr. Mike sat in the passenger seat, and Natalie was crunched next to Patch. They would drive to the Greyhound bus terminal a few hundred yards outside the main gate. The plan was for Meinkewitz to walk from the airline terminal to the bus terminal. The radio at low volume played the Jefferson airplane. Natalie turned up the volume for Somebody to Love. She lip-smiled and nodded her head. Patch felt her foot tapping out the beat. He smiled and caught her eye. "This little airport is 75 miles from New Orleans," said Charlie. "Bet Just the same, I want to survey the landscape before Meinkewitz lands. Agreed, we don't need another Audubon zoo, said Patch. Charlie had loaded rifles and handguns into the back of the station wagon. I hope Ray says more in person than he did on the blue box, said Dr. Mike. He will, said Patch. What about my research? Asked Mike. Did the envelope get to the investigation? We have no idea. If they got the envelope, said Natalie, witnesses will have to be subpoenaed. That is, if Ray is straight with us. Ray is as honest as the day is long. What about Finney himself? Ray went to school with him. That was a long time ago, Patch, said Natalie. Finney was always tough but aloof. Doesn't let you really get to know him. Well, that worries me, said Patch. The green and white sign ahead indicated the airport was 5 miles away. Keep your eyes peeled for anything unusual. Patch pulled in next to 3 late model cars in the bus station. A Greyhound bus was backed into the dock area. We need to be prepared if Finch comes after us to head to New Orleans on the bus, said the gray-haired Charlie. Patch nodded and was more concerned about the airport. He reached over to Natalie and pulled the field glasses from the glove compartment. Then he exited the station wagon. In the late afternoon sun, Patch sat up in the corner of the bus building. At the airport terminal, some 200 yards distant, he counted 11 cars, but nothing suspicious. We need to be at the airport, said Patch. There's nobody here. I'll stay back here. Okay, communicate by blue box, said Patch. Hopefully we pick up Ray in 15 minutes and head back to Mulberry Road. Patch gestured as if he were tossing something ahead. Let's go. Patch positioned Natalie and Charlie on either side of the terminal entrance. Patch sat in the center benches facing the tarmac and the runway of the small airfield. 10 minutes later, orange sunlight highlighted the descending commuter plane. The plane looped over the fields ahead and rode the wind currents down to the runway. Patch panned the terminal entrance, with Natalie pretending to read a newspaper to the right and Charlie smoking a cigarette along the opposite wall. His heart pounded swiftly as he remembered the attack on the zoo. The blue and white plane taxied around the runway and came to a stop, angled upward on the tarmac beyond the sliding glass doors. Patch inhaled. Someone flipped the stairs down from inside. A couple of businessmen moved down the stairs ahead of Meinkewitz in a blazer and tie. He carried his briefcase as he walked onto the tarmac. Like Patch, he checked the surrounding area for a few seconds before he followed the other men through the terminal doors. He caught sight of Patch. I thought I'd see you in the bus terminal, Patch, said Meinkewitz. All clear up there, Ray? Meinkewitz saw Charlie, now standing with Natalie, still holding the newspaper. Everything okay? Station wagon is out front, just being careful. Charlie and Natalie followed shortly after Meinkewitz, and Patch neared the station wagon. Meinkewitz held his briefcase as he climbed in the back seat. Patch looked over his shoulder before the others arrived. Who is Denali? You're not going to like it, Patch, but I can't tell you. Is he as high up in government as we thought? Patch, he's one of the biggies. If any of the network or what's been diverted to Grassley comes out, he surely would be charged with treason. Natalie slid across the bench seat next to Patch. Charlie moved around the driver's side and climbed into the back seat. Everything okay, Ray? Asked Natalie. I'm still in one piece, Natalie, thank you, said Meinkewitz. Where's Jerry? Back in Grassley, answered Patch as he backed out and rounded the lot. I'm going to summarize this as much as I can on the way back. It's important we clear up a few things and implement new procedures. With her Mike in the back seat and Natalie still next to Patch in the front, Meinkewitz began his breakdown of the so-called trip to Washington as Patch put on the headlights. First of all, I departed on one of those commuter planes to Houston. No Washington, they flew me on a private jet to San Francisco. Really? Asked Natalie. I was driven to Yosemite. Denali was in casual clothes. He had 2 members of his staff with him. The staff wanted to do Yosemite Falls. I told him I've had way too many cigars to be hiking to the top of Yosemite Falls. We ended up at the North Rim. Denali mentioned that social drinking in D.C. had the same effect on his physical exertion as my cigars. Patch laughed at Menkiewicz's lack of physical training. You certainly had isolation and security, Ray. We saw the Nevada and Vernal Falls, which was fine for me. I could talk openly. First thing he told me that Phineas is presently alive and well. The good news is the envelope was delivered directly to one of Garrison's investigators outside the city. The information has been seen by the district attorney, but we don't know its disposition. That's great news, said Mike. What happened to Phineas, Hughes? Asked Natalie. He escaped the building and it blew up with an abort procedure he put in place. Too many sensitive materials inside. He didn't know that Biggs and Prescott were back inside. It's assumed by the Air Force that Phineas was incinerated. What he did was to cross the wild on foot, which saved his ass. Then he contacted Denali. Since he is assumed dead, Denali is using him for difficult situations. What about the attack at the zoo? Asked Patch. In Sutcliffe. There's a massive governmental vice surrounding Garrison, and we better hope that Sutcliffe is dead, because if they've started an interrogation, it could lead back to people linked to us or Denali. They don't know that you, Patch, or you, Natalie, were involved. They sure got casualties out there. It was never reported, said Natalie. Patch followed the same state highway he had driven in 1963. Only a few car headlights passed on the winding road. Grassley was 11 miles away. Ray, how do we get more information to Garrison? He's got his hands full, Patch. We're working on getting our investigator out of there. He may have been targeted by Walter Sheridan's people. Why would Denali jeopardize his career by setting up the network? Because from what you're saying, he's at the top of the government food chain. He's privy to information that we aren't. Did he tell you, Ray, who killed Kennedy? Asked Patch. He knows every nook and cranny in D.C., but he doesn't know who killed Kennedy. Does he have any guesses? Asked Patch. I know he doesn't trust Hoover. In fact, he hates Hoover. And I think he fears Dulles, even though Dulles is out of office. He won't talk about the CIA, which tells me something's going on there. I think the CIA ran the operation against Kennedy, Patch. Then that's where we need to find answers. I can help you with that because I've lived through it, and then feed it all to Garrison. You're exactly right, Patch. One thing I have to stress to all of you, secrecy must be maintained. Garrison must never know what Denali has set up. Does Garrison know Denali? When Meinkewitz was silent, Patch and Natalie turned together. He knows Garrison, Patch. He must have nothing to do with Garrison, publicly or privately at this point, especially with the government wrecking ball. They could just kill Garrison. They only kill when they're threatened. That's why Garrison has press conferences whenever he gets new information. If it's in the public arena, they won't get him. What about going after these government people and the writers? Asked Patch. I'll tell you. As we hiked to Yosemite, Denali was against going after them, preferring to keep things above board, and he was afraid of exposure. But as we talked, he left me with these words. It may come to that. Natalie brought a chicken sandwich and orange soda to Patch in the living room at Mulberry. Then she sat on the edge of the chair. Thank you. You're welcome. Patch, did you ever think the people who planned Kennedy's death will never be caught? Cynical. I just don't see how you find a road that leads directly to them. Clay Shore is the beginning of that road. David Ferry was more like a superhighway. That's what I'm saying. They have the defense in place to block, destroy, and kill should anyone get on that road to them. Later, Patch and Natalie both laughed at Dick Smothers revving up his brother Tommy on the console TV. I've heard this routine 100 times and it's still funny. Then Patch looked up. Are you sorry you got in the middle of this, Natalie? She ran her fingers under his chin. No, Patch. We'll be targeted for the rest of our lives unless we disappear. She leaned closer and maintained eye contact. Disappearing has its advantages if you can remain anonymous or assume a new identity. When Patch did not respond, she kissed his cheek. I'm going up to bed, Patch. Her voice was gruff and Patch knew why, but he turned as she headed for the stairs. I've got a lot on my mind, Natalie. Let's walk down back tomorrow. I'd like that, she said, turning. Good night, Patch. Chapter 21, The Centipede Room, 977 Mulberry Road, Grassley, Louisiana, May 14th, 1967. Meinkewitz looked up from the computer screen with the enlargement of Patch and Sherry with their boys on his porch far in the future. Patch leaned on the counter. "That's great, Ray." "Amazing we can scan into that thing so clear," said Meinkewitz. "People will have scanners and computers in their homes very soon, Ray." "I believe it." Patch stared into Sherry's brown eyes, the iris and pupils visible at this resolution. Her smile was the smile he knew and loved. It was as if she were right there. And the boys? "I know you miss them, Patch, and I'm sorry." Patch faced his friend. "That's not good enough. I need to know if I can get back to them, Ray." "Are you pinning me down? You want to know if you can be retrograded back to your family, and I'm telling you at this point the answer is probably no. In theory, I understand the power required to move a bubble above the quantum foam, Patch. The power of a nuclear bomb would be required." Patch banged his fist on the counter. "Then find a way around it." "Just to let you know, money has been appropriated via Denali for more computer programs. That'll put me in the fast lane at least to see if this can be done." "So it is possible?" asked Patch. "I admire your loyalty and integrity, Patch." "What are you talking about, Ray?" "I saw Natalie in the car last night, snuggle up to you, with no one else in the front seat. I didn't encourage that. You didn't turn her away either, did you, Patch?" "No, Uncle Ray, I did not. In fact, if I'm not careful, I could fall in love with her." Meinkewitz spun around on the chair with the rollers. He folded his arms across his chest. "If you're still in the bubble, Patch, that bubble is the same bubble, Dr. Moon's bubble, that brought you back to Spokane in 1963. Patch sat at the edge of the counter. "So what does that mean?" "It means, according to my own theories, that same bubble stretches interdimensionally back to Apex Junction. Why haven't I been tugged back into the bubble like I was when I arrived the first time from Hastings Mountain? Because retrograde diminishes the power that sustains the bubble, depending on the initial power of the bubble." Patch pinched the bridge of his nose. "When I tried to stop Kennedy's motorcade." "Picture reality as one entity, Patch. When you tried to disturb the existing order, whatever holds our dimensions together wouldn't let you do it." "Well, that makes sense now." "Well, hold on. There's a higher dimensional space-time, an extra dimension of time that cannot be seen. Let's just call it an open area where the bubbles form. Between its existence is a logical higher dimensional fold-out, the four-dimensional space-time we all know and love." "Ray, just get me home." Meinkewitz stood and held Patch by the shoulder, the family photograph on the screen. "For what it's worth with Natalie, it's a 50-50 proposition that a way could be found to easily jar loose the bubble, prompting retrograde back to its latest point of origin, Apex Junction." "How do you reach a dimensional bubble to dislodge it?" "That is a complicated process, and I don't have the means right now." "What are the odds?" asked Patch. "Patch, if you're looking for my permission to love that girl, forget it." "No, I'm not. I just want to know if I'll see Sherry and the boys again. I'm still emotionally linked to the woman I love, no matter how I feel about Natalie." Meinkewitz put his hand on Patch's shoulder again. "Just remember what our mission here has become. The national security state gains power every time they defeat freedom. Let me know what I can do to help with the new software. First, we just take a step back from what we can't change. There's a debate tomorrow night about the war, Governor Reagan and Bobby Kennedy." "Well, I'd enjoy seeing that," said Patch. "Bobby will use this if he runs for president," said Meinkewitz. Patch spoke as he left the centipede room. "So will Reagan." Patch was balanced on one end of the long log next to the woods at the far end of the field. Natalie folded her arms across her lightweight jersey as she panned the field. Grass was thicker and greener now with springtime's arrival. Even the birds and sultry air gave the isolated landscape, complete with blooming magnolias and shady sunshine, an idyllic transcendence from their work. She turned and Patch looked up at her youthful eyes. "I wish all this existed without the president's death," She stepped close enough where he sensed her perfume. And what would you do? What I want to do and what I would do are two separate things. Did you ever wonder when you were doing all those experiments at Hastings Mountains to be led down so many roads, Patch? She sat next to him. Her eyes were even more vivid up close. Then she cupped her hand behind his head and kissed him. I'm sorry. He held her chin with his thumb and index finger. Then he hugged her, and he could feel her heart pitter-pattering against his chest. Don't be sorry, Natalie. I feel the same way. I'm a man caught in time, separated from all that I knew, with a 50-50 chance of returning. She spoke within inches of his face. You see, Patch, I've had a dilemma too, ever since I saw you standing on that trail at Mount Wilson. I think I was in love with you right then and there. She kissed him for a terribly long time as they grew physically close. Natalie, what I said was true. But if I had 1 ounce of integrity... Again they kissed, and Patch's tingling emotions surged as he dropped the grand jury testimony pages. He held her shoulders as she looked into his eyes. What are you supposed to do in a hopeless situation, Patch? Her lips were soft and moist as he couldn't help but kiss her. As she breathed rapidly, he shook his head in the sunlight. Life always has a catch, doesn't it, Natalie? She spoke with her lips close to his. Shakespeare said it. I know where you're coming from, Patch. He pecked at her lips and then kissed her longer. She ran her fingers down his cheek. He closed his eyes and held her hand. He fought his emotions. What did Shakespeare say? Part of Sonnet 116. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Natalie, I get it, Patch. I'm not angry, or even think you're a rotten guy. Never mind. I'm going back to the house. She stepped onto the rutted path along the field. He was caught in a twister tornado of conflicting thoughts and love that intersected like two mighty rivers of time into an eternal flood zone. He kicked the dirt near the log as he caught sight of her maybe 100 feet away. Natalie! Natalie, wait! She kept walking toward the house as Patch began to run. He had nearly reached her when she slowly turned. Come back! Patch, I understand. It's all right. I care about you. She took one step forward, but Patch guided her back to him. Let's not throw away what we have. Just keep the brakes on it if you can right now. On some strange level, I even respect you. A lot of men would have handled that differently. I'm ripped apart. If I were brought back here from the future, I'd still want you to care about me. I'll make you this promise, said Patch. If I ever know I'm not going back, just like now, I'll be up front with you. He hugged her. Patch, I heard all your words. All of them. Patch was still in a battle within himself, and he wondered if Meintkewitz's 50-50 odds about getting home might be inflated or inaccurate. But he kept thinking about Shari and the boys, who now had no father. Natalie left the following morning before Patch even woke up. He spent the day reading a couple books about the assassination and wondering where she went. Meinkewitz cooked hamburgers and dogs out back that night, but Patch said very little. Under other circumstances, she would have been sitting next to him on the couch as he and Meinkewitz watched the Vietnam War debate between Governor Ronald Reagan of California and Senator Robert F. Kennedy of New York. Patch would somehow balance what he had allowed to happen,
really good,
or maybe she would come back. Patch continued looking up the staircase. Patch, let it go. Suppose you're right, Ray. Patch settled in the recliner. Well, what do you think, Patch? Asked Meinkewitz during the commercial break. Patch, listen to the commercial. I think Pall Mall Gold 100s, the 7-minute cigarette lasts longer. Meinkewitz lit a cigar. I don't like cigarettes. If you get the
Cleaning
time,
alone
Pall
may not
Mall's
be
got the
effective against
cigarette,
household
said
germs that
Patch,
can cause
as a
odors
commercial
and
for
illness.
Lysol
But
flashed on the
Lysol is.
screen.
Just add a few
Seriously,
capsules
Ray,
of Lysol
the
to
whole
your cleaning
country is
water.
divided,
It's the
just
most
like
effective
Reagan
way
and
to
Bobby
kill household
debating.
germs and the odors they
As
cause.
I've stated before about
But Ray,
some
this
aspects
goes
of the
back to
war.
self-determination,
But I
the
think
self-determination
that
that
the
President
United States
Kennedy
is
wanted,
every
and
effort
why the
to
troops
try to make
were
it
slated
possible
to
for
be
the people
brought
of
back
South
by
Vietnam to determine their own
1965.
destiny.
Well,
I
that
think
never
that's all we
happened in
want,
this
no matter
timeline.
how,
You're right, Patch. The consequences
how
of
we,
change in a timeline.
reservations we
I
have
know.
about the conduct of the
Bobby
war.
wouldn't be out there
I think we're
debating
all
if he
agreed
wasn't going to
in the
run.
United States
You need
that,
political
the
capital to
war can be
run,
settled.
said
The
Meinkewitz.
people of South
Patch
Vietnam can
stretched out as he
determine,
looked
their own
upstairs.
destiny, determine their
I
own
suppose
future,
you're
that we
right.
want to leave South
Tomorrow,
Vietnam.
Patch, two
That's
things.
stated,
Let's start
government
organizing all
policy,
your notes,
certainly what I would
being
like to
in
see,
New
and I think
Orleans,
that's
Florida,
backed
and
by the vast
Dallas.
majority of American
We need to
people.
get all these things to Garrison
the
before
fact
they
is
broadcast
that,
that broadside from NBC against him.
Insurgency
It shouldn't take
taking
that
place
long.
in, South Vietnam
Don't
is
worry
being
about
supported by
Natalie.
North
It's
Vietnam.
not over.
Both of us
You'll work it
let
out.
the people of South Vietnam
One way or
determine
another.
and decide
I suppose
what they
that's
want,
true.
What kind of government they want. What kind
He
of future
stood
they
and walked
want,
up to the television and
what kind of
changed the
economic
channel.
system they want
He
to
stopped
adopt.
at a recorded interview of
participated
Dr.
in the
Martin Luther
boycott
King.
because they were the ones
Patch
using
leaned
the
forward
bus-
and was swept away
bus
from his
more
own
than
problems
anybody
by
else.
King's eloquence and the
And,
meaning of what he was
Montgomery
saying.
was a
He had
community
forgotten Martin Luther King was such a
predominantly
vital leader
church-centered,
of King.
so
Yet he had
that,
blocked
it was
memories
very
of King.
easy to
Patch
get
walked
to
over to the
vast
window as he
majority of
listened to
Negroes
King.
because
Cars raced by
they
on the
were
state
in
highway. He
some
pushed his
way
fingers through his
connected
hair.
with a church in the community.
He knew his indecision had lost
In addition to
Natalie.
your commitment to the idea of nonviolence, wasn't it also the only thing you could do, the white community having the monopoly on violence?
Well, I'll put it another way, that I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society. And it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons. Now, there is no doubt about the fact that